Good evening, everyone in the room and online, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lisa Rubin, Interim Executive Dean of the Schools of Public Engagement at the New School, home of the presenters, or some of the presenters, of tonight's event, the Food Studies Program. As New School members, it's our shared responsibility to make visible social, economic, political history that frames our current realities and to be actively engaged in addressing ongoing inequities. As an institution of higher learning, our charge is also to surface and share knowledge, to interrogate what we think we know, to engage in debate, to have difficult conversations, and to do our part to further prepare current and future leaders, our students. So with these lofty goals in mind, let's talk about food and later on eat. Food is fundamental. Food is essential. Food is often the first word in the familiar phrase, food, clothing, and shelter. We all need food, and we also need a radical reimagining of our food ecosystem and our relationship with food through the lens of equity and social justice. Enter Professor Kristen Reynolds, Chair of the Food Studies Program at the New School, and key contributor, along with many others who helped bring to life this new book, Radical Food Geographies, Power, Knowledge, and Resistance, co-edited with Colleen Hamelman, Charles Levko, and, as I mentioned, Kristen Reynolds. It's no small feat to gather your thoughts and document them in a book. It's even more impressive when so many people are involved in its creation. So heartfelt congratulations to all the people and organizations who were involved in Radical Food Geographies, from ideation to publication. The prefix co, borrowed from the Latin word com, means with, together, joint, jointly, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary. The prefix also means one that is associated in an action with another, fellow, partner. And the effort of creating this book and elevating these conversations is indeed collective. Along with the presenters for tonight's event, there are many co-sponsors and other contributors who have been critical to this effort. As part of tonight's discussion, you will hear from thoughtful panelists who will delve into key themes of the book, which broadly include power and structures of oppression, action through collaboration, and the analytical importance of geography. Before I turn things over to Dr. Jonathan Bach, our Interim Dean of the School of Undergraduate Studies and Professor of Global Studies at the New School, I would like to say congratulations again on your new book. And I encourage everyone here to get a copy if you haven't already. Radical Food Geographies is a book that takes to heart the responsibility to both acknowledge and honor the land and labor that makes our lives possible. And I am pleased to take part in the official launch of this book. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy this wonderful evening. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Jonathan.
Oh, thank you very much, Dean Rubin. Good evening. I want to welcome you all to the New School and to the book launch for Radical Food Geographies, Power, Knowledge, and Resistance. My name is Jonathan Bach, and I'm the Interim Dean of the School of Undergraduate Studies, as well as a Professor of Global Studies here at the New School. I'm thrilled at the response that tonight's event has gotten, both in person and online. It says a lot about this milestone book that is our great honor to celebrate together. We're so fortunate to be joined by the co-editors, along with many of the chapter authors. This is not just any edited volume. It will have an impact for years to come. It is not often that an edited volume is in a position to achieve this. Edited volumes are logistically challenging and need strong vision and editorial direction, but they can often deliver much more than a single author. A well-curated multiplicity of voices can be field and life-changing, and this volume will do just that. Radical Food Geographies, Power, Knowledge, and Resistance will join the ranks of influential volumes. This is not only because it is methodologically and epistemologically unique, but most of all, because it has something very real at stake: how to turn knowledge production into a world-making project. It is at once field building, in the academic sense of giving us a scholarly vocabulary to name the intersections of capitalism and colonialism as they produce a topsy-turvy topology of food systems in various states of collapse and defiance. And it is field busting in how it models scholar activism bringing in knowledges from outside university settings, different language registers, different writing styles, shaking the complacency that too often turns academic insights into implication in the very systems that we take pride in critiquing. In this way, Radical Food Geographies is truly exemplary of what we try to do here at the New School, harking back to the university's early and continuing desire to question systems and encourage radical thinking. We don't always live up to our promise, but it is projects like Radical Food Geographies that hold our feet to the fire and challenge us to be true to our ideals. This evening, you will get a glimpse, or perhaps I should say a taste, of what the volume had to offer, including a very timely chapter on sisterhoods in a Palestinian refugee camp, on indigenous food sovereignty, gentrification, Black urban agrarianism, and more. It is my distinct pleasure now to turn the evening over to Kristen Reynolds, Associate Professor and Chair of Food Studies at the New School, who will provide a fuller introduction to the book, the participants, and the evening ahead. I wish you all an evening that informs and compels us to resist the weaponization of food, to reverse the erasure of the knowledge of food systems, to work for the better world that we so urgently need. Thank you.
I want to thank all of the book authors and contributors. If you picked up a handout as we came in the room, you can see a list of all of the chapter names and authors there. And the archivist, Rosalia Weiner-Torres, whose book you can see on the screen here and here. I'm sorry, I should not hold it so you can't see me here. Just trying to do whatever I can to talk with all of you. And I want to also recognize a few of the authors in the book who were not able to be with us tonight, but who are joining us online. And those are Dahi Tapel Johnson, Ashante Reese, who graciously wrote testimonials for the back of the book, Allison Elkon, Jessica Gilbert Overland, and Joshua Sabika, who are authors in the book, joining us in the Zoom today. But will not be speaking, we'll be hearing from other folks whose names and introductions you will hear shortly. I'd also like to acknowledge Bristol University Press for publishing the book, and the series editors, Mike Goodman and David Goodman, staff, Emily Watt and Angela Cage, who were really wonderful to work with in publishing the book. Our co-sponsors are the Food Studies Program and the Food and Social Justice Action Research Lab, both of which I lead, the Sex Tech Lab, the Gender and Sexuality Studies Institute at the New School, Lakehead University, Sustainable Food Systems Lab at Lakehead University, the Department of Earth, Environmental, and Geographical Sciences at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and the Charlotte Action Research Project, returning to the New School, the Global Studies Program, Environmental Studies Program, and Urban Studies programs here at the New School, and the Tishman Environment and Design Center. So I wanted to give a brief comment on our event series. So Food Studies holds event series every year that bring together our events in a curated fashion around a theme connecting food systems and social justice. So this fall, the theme is food, politics, and social justice, which we construe widely to connect, for example, geopolitics to culinary traditions, urban farming to liberation, and many other themes. So this evening's event and our collective book project touches on many of these intersections. I was hoping to play some music at the beginning of the event, but we'll place them in the reception at the end also as part of the work that we do in our series. We want to acknowledge the protests that took place today on the Palestine rally because in our hearts this is connected to the work that we do related to Radical Food Geographies. We want to express our support in all efforts to bring peace and justice for Palestinians and connect this work with Radical Food Geographies, about which you are about to hear a lot more. This highlights also for us the importance of action that is connected with but goes beyond academic conversations. As you will hear from the first speaker in our book, whose video we will be playing, the injustices experienced by Palestinians have a long history bolstered by colonialism, yet are being resisted every day by both protesters in the streets and Palestinians living in Gaza and the West Bank and refugee camps in neighboring countries. So here, as you'll hear from our other speakers this evening, resistance to oppression takes many forms across time and place, which is a key feature of geography, by the way, the time and place part of it. But central to this is a focus on social and or geopolitical power. So our hope, all of us who have contributed to this book, is that this evening's conversations will lift up both the structural forces that produce these injustices and the ongoing work to create more just food systems. We invite deep dialogue on these topics during the event, during the reception, and beyond. I'm going to talk a little more briefly about the book's process and read a couple of pages, and then we'll pass over to the videos. This book came together in a truly collective process. We worked with scholars and activists across the world to develop the ideas of radical food geography. This started in 2019 when we hosted a day-long workshop in Washington, D.C., connected to this large geography conference that happens every year, academic geography conference, where civil society leaders, activists, and scholars came together in discussion to talk about, connecting food systems and geographies. You'll hear more about that later. Then in 2020, the three of us co-editors, so Colleen Hamelman, Charles Lepko, and myself, put together, or that means edited, a special issue of the journal Human Geography, where we invited articles in the special issue to speak to this theme. Articles in that special issue explored food justice as a path to reparations, popular education, and land-based learning among Black communities, Black cultural production and gentrification, farm worker organizing, and scholar activist practice, among others. For this book, we were very intentional about inviting authors whose voices are often not heard in academic writing or put into the limelight in Anglophone academic publishing in the global North. To do this, and this includes several of the speakers that we will hear from tonight. We will be hearing from speakers who are speaking about their work in their home regions of Palestine, Chile, or India, or about their community-embedded work in the US Midwest, the US South, upstate New York, and Canada and Indigenous territories in that nation. And so we invited chapters. We did a lot of workshopping together, co-working on the chapters, pairing authors with each other to read versions and give feedback. And so this really was a truly collective process, and we hope that it is continuing to be so as we now get to talk about the book at events like this. So now I'm going to just tell you, if you decide that you want to read the introduction to this chapter, you will hear about a little more than I'm about to say about these two intellectuals and action-oriented people. So José de Castro and Graciela Uribe Ortega. I looked all over and I could only find this one picture of her. And so if you don't read Portuguese, which I don't, but I use a translator to understand it, I can't walk away here. Second from the left on this second photo is that person. So I'm just going to read shortly from the introduction to our book, where we talk about these scholars and how they inspired our work on the book. José de Castro was a Brazilian geographer, physician, diplomat, and activist whose writing on hunger, geography, and politics were forerunners to the concept of geopolitics and critical development studies. I'll pause here to say, I'm not shy about the fact that I'm going to mispronounce Portuguese words. I apologize, but I don't want to not say them in the language in which they are written. His book, Geografia de Fome, identified in 1946, it was published, identified hunger as a consequence of social rather than natural structures. His most influential book, Geopolítica da Fome, set forth an understanding of hunger as a global political economic phenomenon. Key themes in these works were strident and explicit anti-Malthusianism. Students in the room might have heard me talk about that before last week. De Castro pinned the origins of hunger neither to the deficits of so-called poor people worldwide, nor to the quantitative limits of global food production, but to the expansion of the global capitalist economy. Prior to the establishment of what we now may call critical development studies, De Castro argued that, quote unquote, underdevelopment and hunger as a corporeal reality, one that we feel in our bodies, rather than a disembodied one, was a result of colonialism, racism, and Western-dominated geopolitics. Now, while these perspectives are fairly common today in most critical scholarship and activism, De Castro's righteous naming of geopolitical, colonial, and racist structures in the 1940s and 50s as the underlying causes of hunger was rare and a courageous analytical pursuit, particularly writing from the context of the majority world, which we discuss in the book as describing the majority of the people who live in this world. Sometimes we also may use the word global south. We can talk about those terms during the reception if you would like. Importantly, De Castro was not only a theoretician, despite the scholarly nature of his research and writing, but his knowledge was rooted in knowledge born of scholarly pursuits and his upbringing in Recife, the focus area of his book Geografia da Fome, and his 1970 novel Of Men and Crabs. Recife is a region in northeastern Brazil where predominantly indigenous and African Brazilian people lived at that time, and often in economic poverty. De Castro was of mixed indigenous and European descent and was clear in his analyses that racism was among the driving factors of social inequity. De Castro influenced and was influenced by French scholars and was involved in international policy, especially eventually serving as the head of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization from 1952 to 56, and as Brazil's ambassador to the UN from 1963 to 64. However, he was forced to leave Brazil in exile following the US-supported military coup in 1964 and spent the remainder of his life in France. There he founded this, I do speak French, Centre International pour le Développement. Voilà. And he continued his research and teaching there until his death in 1973. Despite his intellectual innovations and diplomatic charges, De Castro, his work, and its contributions to geography, geopolitics, and contemporary thinking about food insecurity remain under-recognized, particularly in the Anglophone minority world, which you could also think about as the global north. The lack of recognition of De Castro's influence is not an isolated case, however. It is emblematic of the erasure of the knowledge of food systems and inequity born from the lived experiences of global majority peoples, communities, and regions in the world. I'll just read another paragraph and then I will conclude. While De Castro is indeed an under-recognized example, inspiring our thinking about radical food geographies, we note similar inspiration from female scholars, such as Chilean geographer Graciela Uribe Ortega, who's in the second photo there, who in the 1960s wrote her doctoral thesis on the spatialized and unequal economic effects of industrial development, and was known for her insistence that geography be politically useful. At the moment of the 1973 US-supported military coup in Chile, Uribe Ortega, along with many leftist intellectuals, was taken prisoner by the military. With the aid of diplomatic intervention, she's then exiled to Scandinavia for several years, eventually returning west to join the faculty at Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. I don't speak Spanish either, but I try. And is yet another story demonstrating the intertwining of radical geographic scholarship and politics in Latin America. So we find great inspiration in De Castro and Uribe Ortega's legacies as an entry point to this book on radical food geographies, power, knowledge, and resistance. And now I'm going to pass it over to Charles Levko and eventually Colleen Himmelman to tell us a little bit more about this framework and the book before we move on to presentations from the chapter authors. Thank you, and thank you for your patience.
Okay, hello everyone. I had my back to you all and now I see your faces. It's really nice to see people in the room, and I wish I could see people online, but hello to you too. So Colleen and I are gonna take a few minutes to just give an overview of what this radical food geography idea is. So Kristen's given a bit of the background, and I think it'll set up some of the speakers who are gonna talk about their work and how it fits into this idea. So on your screens, the big one here or the ones you're looking at online, you'll see this. This is an image from the book that Claire Stevens helped us design. And it really outlines this idea of radical, or of the concept and practice of radical food geographies that brings together attention to power, knowledge, and resistance, and to the inequities that shape food systems around the world. So radical food geographies draws on key elements from radical geography and critical food system scholarship towards making food systems more just and sustainable. So critical to radical food geography's approach is also a praxis that pushes food system scholars and activists to pursue work that is simultaneously grounded in theorizing, action, and reflection related to the intersection of place and spatiality. So we conceive of this idea of a radical food geography as having three interconnected elements, and they're the elements that you see on that image there. So the first is theoretical engagement with power and structures of oppression, both inside and outside the academy. Second is action through academic social movement and civil society collaborations. And third is analysis through a broadly defined geographic lens. So we're just going to take a minute now to go through three of these pieces to give a sense of where this is all coming from. So first, the idea of learning from critical food system studies. So the interdisciplinary study of food systems can be traced to the mid-20th century that includes studies of power, foodways, gastronomy, and culinary history. Key examples include Francis Moore Lepay's argument for the need to attend to environmental and political implications of meat-based diets, Sidney Mintz's book in 1986 of the political and economic analysis of how tastes, identity, and European expansionism evolved as a result of capitalist relations. And food historians and anthropologists have also engaged in migrant foodways more recently. Across a range of topics and subfields, critical food system scholars are engaged in examinations of historical and structural inequalities of food systems. The interdisciplinary nature of food system scholarship enables practical responses to social change, evident in the growing attention to patriarchy, white supremacy, settler colonialism, and oppression in the dominant food system, and including intersections of food production, harvesting, and struggles for social and environmental justice. So much of the critical food system scholarship not only studies the phenomenon, but all pertaining to food production and harvesting and on-the-ground justice work, but also attempts to work in solidarity with it.
And so in addition to these ideas from critical food studies, we pull on scholarship and thinking and action coming from radical geography scholarship. In North America, radical geography traces its roots to a rejection of the US status quo in the 1960s, and in relation to the US Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power Movement, the Chicano Movement, the American Indian Movement, second wave feminism, and opposition to the Vietnam War, a very exciting time to be involved in social movements. The group of self-described radical geographers, grounded in Marxist and anarchist thinking, sought a restructuring of society. They were also challenging their discipline, one that was rooted in positivist and quantitative approaches that they insisted were unresponsive to societal crises and reproduced oppressive structures. These radical geographers argued that geography remained racially segregated, steeped in Eurocentrism, systemic racism and patriarchy, and settler colonialism. More recently, feminist geographers continue to make visible patriarchy within geography and the challenges to pursuing geographic scholarship for marginalized social positions. There is also a history of geographers worldwide using spatial analysis to uncover and understand even uneven socio-geographic impacts of industrial development. In our introductory chapters, as shared by Kristen a minute ago, we also point especially to important thinking in Latin America, in France, and in other parts of the world grounded in this radical geography frame. Today, Black, Latina, Indigenous, critical race, feminist, queer, and decolonial scholarship have further expanded radical geographies and their understandings and analysis of the diverse modes of oppression that operate in our world today. Importantly, in this book, we use radical geography, or in our introductory chapter, we use radical geography in the singular when we're talking about the discipline, but we utilize radical geographies in the plural to encompass both that subfield and the plurality of knowledges, as epistemologies and actions that engage geographic and spatial thinking towards social and political change. The overarching position of these scholars was that the field of geography needs to account for its colonial baggage and its complicity and contributions to the accumulation of power and capital, and that we need to apply theoretical engagement to the real world so as to be politically useful. Radical geographers have emphasized the political and social construction of space and engaged with the empirical conditions of uneven development to produce philosophical considerations of justice and well-being. These together provide us an opportunity to think about the ways in which theory and action can come together. And so radical food geographies pulls as well from action-oriented scholarship. Radical geography scholarship in North America and Western Europe has often called for moving beyond theorizing to engage directly with social movements. This includes pointing to the political nature of research and the importance of grounding radical theory and practice in the fundamental needs of survival that are threatened by material inequity and to seek emancipatory alternatives. With recognition of the diverse ways that geography scholars experience relative comfort in academic settings, the evolution of radical geographic scholarship has often fallen short in terms of engagement with contemporary movements for political and social justice beyond as well as within the ivory tower. So critical food system scholarship has evolved in parallel to food-related social movements and reflects changes in society more broadly. This includes pursuits of food justice and food sovereignty, as well as critiquing corporate food regimes that dispossess multitudes of people from self-determination, land, and the means of production. Food system scholars have also worked closely and at times intertwined with alternative food networks in North America and at times offering important critiques to those networks. Building on the work of these activists and scholars, we suggest that action-oriented critical food scholarship could have more impact through deeper engagement with theories of power, oppression, and space, while radical geography scholarship could be more impactful through direct action and engagement with activists on the ground.
Okay, so this brings us to our book, looking at radical geography literature and conversation with critical food system scholarship enables a co-learning for creating change. Radical food geography praxis explicitly emphasizes the nexus of theory, action towards building more just, sustainable food systems at diverse spatial and temporal scales. The book explores spatial and action-oriented dimensions of issues such as Black agrarianism, Indigenous knowledges, gender dimensions of food systems, implications of the COVID-19 pandemic, community kitchens in politically contentious settings, gentrification, borderlands and immigration, scholar activism, and a lot more. Studies in the book span the globe from North America to Latin America, South Africa, Palestine, and other places as well. So the chapters are organized around three general sections, which are up on the screen here. Just name them quickly. Scale highlights power relationships that produce and regulate the flows of fixities of people, resources, and ideas, and culture across varying distances, places, and time. Radical food geography rejects the hierarchical nature of scalar analysis, instead arguing for the interrelationships of actors and actions across scales. This approach identifies the ways that food systems are produced across different scales, but experienced in local places. The second general theme the chapters are organized in is spatial imaginaries, that calls attention to the role of place and place-based networks in not only constructing food systems and relationships with food, but also in resisting injustices to those systems. Spatial imaginaries consider the production of space and place, as well as different meanings and discursive constructions of such concepts. And the third section of the book is human and more than human relationships, which centers on sociological relationships, equity and social activism, and activist scholarship and scholar activism as the foundation for knowledge formation and sharing. Here, assemblages of more than human geographies, animals, plants, waterways, and natural resources are understood as active co-producers of knowledge and action. This approach considers, for example, how relationships among people have produced inequities, but can also be transformed to create more equitable food systems, and insists that action is grounded in relationships forged over time through recognition of shared and divergent experiences and objectives embedded in existing power structures. So the chapters in each of these sections shares examples of how power, knowledge, and resistance to inequalities are changing food systems around the world in diverse ways. They also engage with actions seeking to shape these systems towards justice and sustainability. So we see this book as a part of a broader project to grow radical food geographies. It's a project that's necessarily incomplete and always imperfect. And the book's not intended to be comprehensive in the way it examines these issues, but rather it's an invitation to a shared project for even greater radical praxis in pursuit of justice and sustainability in food systems across spaces and places.
So we are turning now to the presentations from some of our chapter authors. And several of them have recorded videos for us, but then they are also online to answer questions. And then we're really lucky to have one here with us who will come up and give her presentation about midway through. Yafa is both a refugee and a researcher. She has a PhD in human geography and an MSc in local development studies from the University of Padova in Italy. She is currently a research associate at the Department of Geography at Durham University in the UK. She is also the leader of the Decolonizing Development Research Group at the EU-funded Network of Decolonizing Development Cost and Action. She has various academic and non-academic publications in books, journals, and digital platforms. As a Palestinian herself, Yafa's main research focus is Palestinian refugees, but her broader set of research interests are refugee studies, decoloniality, and critical development studies.
Hello everyone, my name is Yafa Al-Masri. I normally introduce myself as both a refugee and a researcher. I am a stateless Palestinian refugee, and I'm also a postdoctoral research associate in human geography. I've had the pleasure and the honor to be part of this book project, Radical Food Geographies, Power, Knowledge, and Resistance. I specifically contributed to part 3 of this amazing book. Part 3 was dedicated to human and more than human relations, and therefore chapter 12 of mine was titled Food Making in the Sisterhoods of Burj al-Barajne Refugee Camp Towards Radical Food Geographies of Displacement. And my chapter specifically delves into the potential of food and the relationships that occur around food in shaping geographies of displacement. This chapter is actually a documentation of a part of my life while growing up in a sisterhood in Burj al-Barajne refugee camp, and it documents how the women of this refugee camp reroute themselves and us, the younger refugees, into our native Palestinian villages despite forced displacement. And they do so around collective food making and other food-related practicing, and also through food sharing. So this chapter is to a large extent an autoethnography of how we, displaced Palestinians, employ food and the practices around it, and even our social relationships around food, to place ourselves in places from which we were excluded. This refers to how Palestinian refugees center memories of food, stories of food, and knowledge of native Palestinian lands and soils and climate to claim right to a land from which was native to them, but from which they were forcefully exiled and left out in refugee camps to linger to those memories and to these lands. So in this chapter, I also demonstrate how sisterhoods of Palestinian refugees not only use food to claim space in their homelands, but also how they claim space in the host community, in Lebanon in this case. And they do so by establishing these networks of food sharing, where they circulate food that is culturally relevant in order to protect each other and to protect the Palestinian community and to protect their culture. By highlighting the importance of studying the peculiarity of radical food geographies of displacement, what I aim to do is inspire further research into this potential of food to shape geographies of displacement, but also to empower and sustain communities in the face of uprooting and exclusion. So I really hope that you'll find this book, with its diverse perspectives on food, with its contributions to this knowledge on land and resistance and social justice, as informative and inspiring as we hoped it to be. Thank you again for watching this, and we look forward to hearing your opinions on the book and on our chapters.
The next one that we have is from Rosie Kerr, a postdoctoral fellow with the Sustainable Food Systems Lab at Lakehead University with a PhD in education from Queen's University. She is working with Plenty Canada. Oh, it started on me. She is working with Plenty Canada, supporting a project to gather Indigenous perspectives and approaches to United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. She focuses her research on the role of peer-to-peer learning and building food sovereignty and community self-sufficiency in Mexico and Canada. And she is presenting here on a chapter that had many authors that I expect she will talk about.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in and showing up here for the launch of the book on radical food geographies. My name is Rosie Kerr. I am a settler living in what we now call Canada. My ancestors 5 generations ago came from Scotland, Ireland, England, and Wales. I now live on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. I'm here today to give you a taste of what's in the chapter that we all wrote together, with the purpose of mobilizing knowledge of how to move beyond good intentions when it comes to Indigenous, non-Indigenous partnerships. My purpose today is to fulfill my commitment to share the knowledge and learnings that all my co-authors shared with me, and to honor the knowledge and experience that was shared with them by the people and communities they work alongside. I am very grateful and humbled to work with Larry, Jess, Glenn, Julie, Amanda, Erica, Alex, Charles, and Sarah, and to be a part of coming together to share what we know, what we've experienced, and have learned through attempting to work in partnerships based on ethical space. So what is ethical space? It was coined by literary theorist Roger Poole in 1972 and taken up by and further developed by Cree elder and legal scholar Willie Ermine, and a few others have developed it further since. Ethical space aims to bring together Indigenous and settler knowledge systems to co-create relational space where different ways of knowing can interact. According to Ermine, ethical space is formed when two societies with disparate worldviews are poised to engage each other. It is the thought about diverse societies and the space in between them that contributes to the development of a framework for dialogue between human communities. He uses a metaphor of two people sitting on a bench and reflects on the electrifying nature of that area between entities that we thought was empty. The space between people is where ideas, assumptions form the foundation for relationships. But because of the unjust power relations that underpin historical and also current realities and what we now call Canada, encounters between Indigenous and settler peoples require explicit rules for engagement in order to enable ethical relationships to be negotiated. So this being said, ethical space acts as an intermediary between knowledge systems where participants commit to processes that nurture relationships at all levels. Ethical space is a process for open communication and collaboration, wherein participants commit to respecting different ways of knowing. Larry McDermott, an Algonquin elder and co-author on this chapter, explains that those engaging in ethical space are responsible for holding up the integrity of the circle and ensuring that everyone feels safe and heard. In writing this chapter collectively, the authors, both Indigenous and settler, hold each other in ethical space. We invite the reader also in this chapter to join us on our journey as we struggle collectively towards an understanding of how we can support, enable, and in some cases, get out of the way of those who are actualizing Indigenous knowledge, culture, and food sovereignty. This chapter starts by acknowledging that settler colonialism is ongoing in what we now call Canada. The chapter tells stories and shares learnings of the authors who have spent many years working in partnership and understand that simply providing surface level support without disrupting settler normalcy serves to reinforce power and privilege. Through the personal stories and reflections of the authors, we share, for example, how settler hesitancy and unexamined assumptions that Indigenous people should operate within the norms of the dominant settler culture can get in the way of Indigenous cultural resurgence. Julie shares a story about how she came to understand that success can mean different things to different people. To move beyond good intentions, each partner needs to consider on whose terms and by whose metrics decisions are being made. Glenn asks us to consider in which direction gratitude is expected to flow in philanthropic relationships. Jess invites us to focus on relationships and spend time to listen, learn, and live in reciprocity. So that gives you, I'm hoping, a little bit of taste of what is in this chapter. And thank you for listening, and I hope you will get a chance to read it.
All right, our next speaker is in person. Let me give a quick introduction, although it seems half the room knows Lynn already. So Lynn is a Brooklyn-based writer and designer exploring design systems, food justice, and critical geography in the urban built environment. She comes from a hospitality management marketing background and now specializes in visual brand design. Her current research investigates how gentrification occurs not only through the changes in land use and development, but also through the consumption of food and the environment in which the food is consumed. Physical signage, social media, typography, logos, color palettes, interior, exterior decor, and visceral memories. And we are so lucky to have Lynn here to tell us in person all about her chapter.
Thank you so much. Hi everyone, can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Thank you so much for being here. I also want to shout out Dr. Ashante Reese, who's on Zoom, for advising me through this piece of work. Like Dr. Hamilman mentioned, I'm Lynn. I am a designer, now based in Brooklyn. I was raised in Houston, Texas. My chapter, Consuming Chinatown, Gentrifying Through Taste and Design, is a collection of my own memories, design analyses, and critical questions, analyzing the visual, culinary, and visceral implications of restaurant gentrification in a neighborhood I call my home. I grew up in Houston's Chinatown, also known as Asia Town. These are photos of me. We can ooh and ah. I like to think I was a cute baby. I grew up picking up the weekly Chinese newspaper from my grandfather and $6 bun maize for breakfast every Sunday morning. Houston is one of the most diverse cities in the US, a commonly used city branding tactic. In my research, we learn how this narrative of multiculturalism and diversity blankets the displacement of longtime working-class residents of color. Since 2004, land values along the Bel Air Boulevard that runs through Asia Town have increased between 25 and 50% as developers have built over 2 million square feet of construction for high-end retail and residential opportunities, under the guise that they are expanding Asia Town. I ask, how do we justify the expansion of a Chinatown if it must come at the expense of its longtime residents? In my chapter, I ask what can gentrification look and feel like? To do this, I use the framework of feminist visceral geographies in order to consider how memory and historical experience can produce knowledge. I also view race and racial capitalism as an aesthetic language and visual logic that informs the way we move throughout our built environment. Using these frameworks, my research analyzes digital and physical design elements like product packaging, how interiors are arranged in a restaurant, and social media marketing. I also analyze archived materials like newspapers and Google and Yelp restaurant reviews in order to understand how people experience the restaurants in their hometown. So I compare Asiatown's oldest shopping complex, built in 1983, Daiho Square, to its newest complex, Bel Air Food Street, built in 2019. At the very top, you'll see that Daiho Square rebranded itself. They did a complete facelift. You might notice that the new Welcome grocery store kind of looks a little bit like Whole Foods, which is really interesting. They also rebranded their name to D Square or D2 because according to its website, Daiho is too hard to pronounce for many people. At the same time as D Square's rebrand, just across the street, Bel Air Boulevard at the very bottom, was constructed. Bel Air Food Street was constructed by Asian American developer Kevin Kahn. In order to do this, he tore down Daiho Apartments, which was a complex of affordable housing units that my grandfather and I always drove past on our weekly pilgrimages to Chinatown. He states that his intention is to bring in trendy global franchises in order to prove that Asiatown is not just your basic chop suey place. Again, I ask, must Asian American placemaking come at the expense of affordable housing in a city with a rapidly shrinking housing market? To do this, I analyze operational information and the physical exteriors of these restaurants, and then I also look at restaurant case studies, including Hunan Plus, one of the oldest operating restaurants, Bubble Egg, Bel Air Two Hands, as well as Migo Saigon Street Food. And you can read more about some of those analyses. So about resisting gentrification. If gentrification is shaped by the contestation over land use and profit, then I argue resisting gentrification requires that we engage with the built environment in ways that prioritize ourselves, our neighbors, and the land. I look to New York's Chinatown Art Brigade and their large-scale projections of anti-gentrification messages in Manhattan's Chinatown, as well as Houston's Project Row House and their row house-style duplexes providing affordable housing, maintaining the surrounding neighborhood's architectural landscape. By understanding how interrelated food, space, and race are within Asiatown, we come to more nuanced understandings of urban gentrification as a process that encompasses not only land use, but also ways of living, as residents adapt to a neighborhood's spatial imaginaries and the changes that come with it. These narratives exist across multiple and varying geographies, timelines, and memories, but studying them together and allowing them to exist within the same breath captures the essence of a collective memory. Thank you so much.
Dr. Brittany Jones, that as she indicated is a dedicated skull activist who merges academic excellence with community activism. Amazingly, she currently serves as a Toledo City Council member, where she plays a pivotal role in legislative development, community events, and budget oversight. With a PhD in spatially integrated social sciences from the University of Toledo, Dr. Jones focuses her research on Black food geographies, urban agriculture, and community development. Her professional experience spans roles such as survey and evaluation analyst at the United Way of Greater Toledo and instructor at the University of Toledo. Dr. Jones is a published author and frequent speaker advocating for food justice and urban planning. She is also an active leader in several organizations, including the Ohio Food Policy Network, American Planning Association, and Delta Sigma Theta sorority. Her commitment to empowering marginalized communities is evident in her work both inside and outside academia.
Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Brittany Jones, and I'm here to talk about my chapter, Developing Black Urban Agrarianism. This chapter is part of the newly released book, Radical Food Geographies, Power, Knowledge, and Resistance. So a little bit about me. I am Toledo born and raised. I am a self-proclaimed scholactivist or scholar activist, particularly when it comes to food sovereignty and Black foodways within urban areas. For my day jobs, I am a data analyst for the United Way of Greater Toledo, and the newly appointed City Councilwoman for the City of Toledo. So my chapter looks at the return to the land by Black American descendants of the Great Migration. This was inspired by my dissertation, which I completed in 2021, that talked about empowerment through consumption, land ownership, land banks, and Black food geographies. The idea behind this dissertation is to look at how land banks can be an asset to urban agriculture, particularly within Black neighborhoods or neighborhoods primarily made up of people of color. This chapter highlights Black food activism in 2 Ohio cities, my hometown of Toledo and Dayton, Ohio, which is similar to a sister city of Toledo in terms of demographics, size, and history of being both manufacturing as well as other industries dealing with that sort of production. The chapter is an expansion of Dr. Monica White's Collective Agency and Community Resilience, or CACR. This is found within her 2018 book, Freedom Farmers, which also highlights various areas where Black food activism is growing and empowered by such dealings such as land availability as well as wisdom preservation when it comes to agriculture growth. Black urban agrarianism equals radical food geographies. So what is the connection that I was trying to do within this chapter? Well, CACR operates upon 3 principles. Commons as praxis, which says that in order for a food activity or food initiative to really come together, there must be a collective agreement of goals and objectives from all the parties involved. The second, prefigurative politics, creates an alternative political system that gives room for self-reflection for those who are involved in these activities. And economic autonomy, which is the control of and benefit from economic activity dealing with food, such as being an urban farmer. It is a resistance and refusal of the white dominant food system or commercialization of our food system. It supports and emphasizes self-sufficiency by centering Blackness and everything that comes with it. It also operates as a guide for sustainability for these efforts. So how does Black urban agrarianism expand radical food geographies? Well, it highlights the urban infrastructure issues prohibiting or limiting Black food sovereignty. We have all heard of urban renewal, as well as the flight of grocery stores leaving from the urban core over the times of great racism and discrimination. It challenges the ideas and entities supporting the use of urban land as solely for commercial use. And it redefines Black food spaces as liberating, while also preserving that Black agrarian knowledge, especially from our grandparents or even other elders that we respect in the community. Overall, Black urban agrarianism is radical. Thank you for the time for my presentation. You may reach me at this email, and I look forward to hearing your questions as well as comments.
Our final speaker today is Francisco Garcia Gonzalez, who holds a BSc in Business Administration from Universidad de Chile and an MSc in Environmental and Sustainable Development from University College London. He is currently a PhD student in development planning at UCL, focusing on urban food sovereignty, and the role of food movements such as Ollas Comunes in Chile. He also works as a consultant for UN FAO.
Hello everyone, my name is Francisco and it's a pleasure to present our chapter Radical and Intersectional Food Systems in the Context of Multiple Crises, the case of Ollas Comunes in Chile, which explores a community-based response that fits the most vulnerable in difficult times. In 2020, Chile, like many countries, faced a period of interconnected crises that disproportionately impacted the most vulnerable communities. In this context, Ollas Comunes emerged as a space of hope and resilience, providing not only food for their neighbors, but also a form of political resistance and care. Our chapter delves into the role of Ollas Comunes during this period, examining how these autonomous and solidarity-based initiatives provided essential support through cooking together meals to their communities, while also symbolizing a powerful act of resistance against systemic injustices. To fully understand the phenomenon of Ollas Comunes, it's important to know their history. These initiatives first appeared in Chile in the 1930s, when the economic crisis of the Great Depression affected people's access to food. They returned massively in the 1920s during the Pinochet dictatorship, a period marked by severe poverty and weak state support. In all cases, women played a crucial role in organizing and leading these initiatives, turning them into vital local mechanisms. Then, during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, there was a massive resurgence of Ollas Comunes across the country to address the urgent food insecurity faced by many inhabitants, especially in the most marginalized communities. In our analysis, we use a radical food geographies approach. This perspective challenges traditional narratives and promotes interdisciplinary collaboration with social movements. We also use a socio-environmental justice lens, focusing on three key dimensions: distribution, recognition, and participation. Finally, a central theme in our chapter is also the role of gender within Ollas Comunes. Women, who have historically led these initiatives, continue to do so, drawing on a collective memory of resistance. These women-led kitchens challenge traditional gender roles and redefine the concept of care, extending it beyond the family to the whole community. In doing so, they are reviving practices of self and community care that are essential in time of crisis. Our research includes interviews in Santiago, the capital city of Chile and home to around 7 million people. These interviews were conducted with three leaders of Ollas Comunes in Santiago, each from a different district: Cerro Navia, Lo Prado, and San Joaquin. These leaders, with previous experience of community participation, have continued their work beyond the pandemic. Through their stories, we explore the social composition, the role of gender, and how these Ollas Comunes operated under a socio-environmental justice lens. In summary, Ollas Comunes could offer valuable lessons for achieving food justice and sovereignty. For instance, they demonstrate the power of solidarity-based and horizontal practices that resist dominant structures. Ollas Comunes can also be seen more than just a response to food insecurity. They are potentially be a pathway toward building more just and equitable societies. In conclusion, Ollas Comunes are an interesting example of a community food initiative that is under-recognized and under-supported by the state. They show us that even in the most difficult circumstances, communities can come together to create solutions that are not only practical, but also deeply political. It is also interesting to reflect on the ideas of scale and socio-spatial imaginaries. Ollas Comunes were quite effective in increasing distribution, recognition, and participation at the local neighborhood level, but did not achieve the same results at the district level, where their efforts were not effectively supported and recognized, and their leaders were generally excluded from participation in decision-making. This kind of scaling up remains a challenge for grassroots initiatives. As we reflect on these practices, we should also consider how they can contribute to broader struggles for socio-environmental justice and food sovereignty, both in Chile and around the world. Thank you.
Can we get a big round of applause for all of our presenters? We have, I think, time to take maybe 2 questions. If there's anybody in the audience, and we've been watching stuff on the Q&A, and I don't know that questions have come in there. So we're gonna leave it to the audience in the room. If anybody has questions that would like to get us started. And Lynn, do you wanna come up too, so you can be here to help answer?
All right, so my question is for all of y'all who are presenting here with us in your chapters today. Coming back to like this collective process, for those of you who have not published books before, it's a long process. So you like finish it and then it comes out like 2 or 3 or 4 years later. So this one was pretty quick. I'd say maybe a year ago, year and a half. So that's a year and a half that's gone on. So I'm just kind of wondering for you each, reflecting on your writing in this chapter and what you're doing now and, groups that you work with, what thoughts have you had about like how your writing for this book has made you think about some of the work that you're currently doing or that you hope to do? Maybe we'll go with Lynn first, and then we'll pass around tag it style on the Zoom.
I was hoping that someone from, we would pass it on to Dr. Jones or Francisco, so I'd have some time to think. But for the greater good, so we can figure out tech stuff, I think that, so over the past 2 or 3 years since graduating and finishing this piece of writing and research, I have entered a career as a full-time designer, which is really exciting. Also, I'm on my tiptoes, so I'm gonna, which has been an incredibly requires a different skill set than writing. And what's so exciting and engaging about it is that it's a very tactile experience. For me, writing and working on this book with so many great authors and academics and writers, and having my work be aligned with the context of everyone else's work, even just this past hour or so alone, watching myself drawing so many connections between my work and Dr. Joe, everyone involved, has been really exciting. And it is it gives me the ability to just ground myself and remember that there is a community of people who are, people who are working to, build community, fight back, rethink structures of power, and view, create radical food geographies, and explore that. So working on this chapter in the context of the greater book has been a really rewarding experience. So, yeah.
Well, hello, everyone. And like I said, it's been a pleasure just being part of this and part of this experience. This chapter is really the first that I've done as a solo author. And definitely it was something that I've been wanting to do just as an offshoot to my dissertation. Excuse me if you hear my daughter in the background. She's 2, so she's running around right now and making a lot of noise. But just looking at how my chapter just connects with the other authors, it really reiterates that this is an ongoing concept. It's definitely room for evolution, definitely room for innovation as far as how to just counteract or just create alternative systems that will benefit those who just want a place or space for themselves when it comes to food. So the help of just seeing how everything is connected with other authors, as well as the help with the editors, going over the chapter, making sure that everything is connected, it definitely helped out a lot. So this is an experience, especially since I didn't feel like I was on an island by myself. It was definitely an experience that I truly treasure and hope to continue as far as other chapters, other projects, anything of that nature. I really did enjoy it. And it was fast. Usually, I'm kind of familiar with just how publishing is, and it takes a long time, but this was really fast. So I was quite surprised with the turnaround, but and how it connects to my work. Basically, that I'm doing that now. So with the land banks, trying to work with them as far as developing urban agriculture as a whole, but definitely focusing in on the urban core because of the vacancy that we have, as well as working with communities and trying to connect those resources. It's a lot of disconnect, a lot of silos, and this is something that expands upon that and offers some advice as far as how they can navigate that as well.
Awesome, thank you. Francisco, do you want to go next?
Okay, I can go. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to share with the other authors and with you and the audience. About the question, about the process, I think my first feeling is challenging, and also time consuming, because it has a lot of comments and suggestions all throughout the process. But overall, I feel that this to a better purpose. I don't know how to explain it, because maybe because in first instance, because my language is the first language is Spanish, and we usually write more, I don't know, doing rounds and rounds to explain the point. And in English, it's so direct and practical. So that is the first point that I have to relearn to do this chapter. And the other interesting thing about the whole process is refine the concepts, and actually to do some contribution in this crucial thing happening in Chile about the food insecurity, about the community initiative. So for me, it was put pressure to do a good work for the whole community kitchens movement. That's why I was interested to put this topic in this kind of important book that spread the word of these community initiatives. It's a Latin American movement, but particularly in those people struggling even right now with this food insecurity situation. So yeah, that's for now. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Rosie, you get the final word.
Final word, wow. Thank you, everyone. A lot, my reflections are that a lot has changed since beginning to write this chapter. And even within the relationships of the people that I showed in that circle as the co-authors. And despite that, it was agreed by all of the authors that the lessons and learnings contained in the chapter that we wrote together were still important to put out in the world. So for me, this process has really reinforced the importance of relationships in this work, and jumping over difficulties, or, working through difficulties so that important learnings that change the way we all work can still be shared.
All right, then. Yeah, I can't find my notes, but it's okay because I know what I want to say. That's fine. Okay, thank you so much. I guess what I wanted to say is related to that. One of the reasons that we wanted to do this book as a hybrid online and in-person event is that we wanted to do an in-person event because it's nice to have all of our friends and colleagues and supporters here with us. And we also didn't want to just constrain the book launch to like who happens to be in the United States or has money to fly to New York and stay here, right? And so we're so grateful to all of the authors who recorded those videos and presented and joined us online. Francisco's in the UK, so it's like midnight there now, or past midnight, maybe, midnight, right? So, we are just really grateful for everybody that joined us online, the presenters and the attendees, and glad that despite the technical difficulties, we've been able to welcome in presentations and voices and authors and thinkers and scholars from many places in the world, not just people who are able to be with us here in New York. So thank you for your patience with all of this. And I've been really excited to just hear everybody talk about their work and exchange a bit. So I think that was the second to last thing I wanted to say. Let's see if I can change my slide here. So if you want more technical difficulties, don't worry, because these two events are going to be in person, and I think we can dial down microphones on the table. The next two events that we'll be holding through the Food Studies program or supported through the Food Studies program are these following ones. On September 28th, at the end of this month, we will be co-sponsoring an in-person evening event at the Hattie Carthen Community Garden, which is in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. This will be an all-evening event, ceremony, healing on the land. We will be screening the film Rhythms of the Land, directed by Dr. Gail Myers, who is the co-founder of the organization called Farms to Grow, and also teaches a course here at the New School in our Food Studies program named Black Farmers and Foodways in the United States. She will be joined by a panel including Tamara Thomas, who's here with us tonight, youth who work in the Hattie Carthen Community Garden, and the entire event is co-curated by farmer Yanat Fleming, who is one of the main leaders at the Hattie Carthen Community Garden, a healer, a chef, and an amazing leader. So if you're interested in that, I would ask you to email us at foodstudies@newschool.edu, and we can pass along the information. It'll be, sorry I didn't finish the points, film, panel discussion, a super amazing dinner prepared by Farmer Jan and the youth that she works with, ceremony, and music on the land. So please join us if you're interested in a lovely and beautiful evening experience. The second event we are holding this fall is still in development, so I can just tell you some of the details about it. It will be October 14th here at the New School, only in person, and it is going to be about Palestinian food sovereignty. It's an event where we will be hosting the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, Michael Fakhri, who will be opening the event with a brief presentation of his recent report to the United Nations, which I understand also includes graphic novel-style illustration to also communicate in other forms besides writing, and 3 Palestinian women, chef, food writer, and seed saver. So more details to be announced. This is really coming together quickly. Again, you can email us at foodstudies@newschool.edu. So now I'm going to once again say thank you. We are going to be closing the Zoom webinar and saying goodbye to our online friends. Thank you very much. Could we please, even though we can't see them, applaud for them? And so we'll be concluding our event for the online participants. Thank you so much to all of you, and please enjoy your evenings and nighttime if that is the case for you. And for those of us in the room, we have a reception. I'm going to try to hook up the music that I wanted to play, but we'll see what happens about that. And thank you again. Have a great night.